Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm not even going to ask, but I'm assuming that very few people have heard of the term machine time analytics and are probably curious, what the hell is this? What I want to do in the next 30 minutes is maybe take a peek around the corner of financial technology. We've been doing this for quite a number of years, over 15 years, basically monitoring and providing surveillance of the world's traded infrastructures. And our view is that all of the topics that we went through today is actually going to usher in a whole new era of trading technology. And so it's needs must, right? So the data challenge, the surveillance challenge, the cybersecurity challenge, all of this is going to feed into one thing, which is how do I make more money? And it turns out that technology is going to play a really important role in that. It's just not going to happen tomorrow. There's a big hurdle we've got to get over. And so I want to give you a little bit of a peek into that as to why we think that and what is it that we're seeing. We've been tracking basically the speed of markets for 10 years. And simple rule is that they continue to get faster. Not in a kind of normalized way, it's just that the unit of transaction, as technology gets faster and smarter, it just continues to basically increase in speed, and we don't see any change in that just because technology will continue in that direction. And the first thing to observe here, by the way, is the vertical scale here is logarithmic. It's not linear. So that's kind of important. And already we have standard venues that most venues execute, at least in the equities market, in under 100 microseconds. We see them now coming into the tens of microseconds, and there's no reason why we won't continue to see that decrease. So what I want to highlight here is that we've seen this movie play out. We've all been kind of partakers of that and not just audience members. And this is basically what happened. First thing that happened is that trading became a blur. It was just much harder to see and understand exactly what was happening and why it happened. Why did that order get filled that way? Can you tell me precisely what did happen? And all of a sudden, the performance and the predictability of our trading systems became critical for our success. Whether we were client-facing, whether we were prop trading, whether we were a vendor, people needed to understand and gain comfort that they knew what was going to happen. Infrastructure failure or mishap had a disproportionate impact on the business. All of a sudden, all hell could break loose in a microsecond. And that was quite concerning. And so that went to the boardroom, and all of a sudden, businesses had a much better appreciation of the risk that they were undertaking. And now we have to deal with cyber attack. And are we prepared for that? Because that has anyone heard the term high-frequency hacker? If you haven't, it's coming. And so operating risk rises to a whole new level, and then, of course, the regulators step in and say, what the hell is happening here? And that goes into overdrive. And all of this is happening because we're operating at machine time. And so to understand the concept of machine time, we have to go back and understand the concept of human time, or more specifically, we often use the term real time. So is something working real time? And if I was to ask you, what is your concept of real time? Generally speaking, as humans, we think it's, well, if it responds quickly to me. And to put a time scale on that, generally speaking, if something happens within a second, we consider it's real time. So if I ask a question, I get an answer within a second, it's real time. So here's the question. If we were to ask a machine, what do they consider real time? We might get a very different answer. Of course we would. Because the machine and the machines we use to execute trades on our behalf can do things sometimes 1,000,000 times faster than we can as humans. And so the concept of time is completely different for a machine than a human. And so we have failed to understand that concept. We have failed to put ourselves in a position of, if I was a machine, how would I look at this problem? although the really clever people have totally got this. And so if we look at machine time is a very simple concept. It's basically the time scale at which a machine acts or responds. And so if a machine is capable of doing a task within of order of a microsecond, then its idea of machine time is in the microsecond time scale. It's not really a second. And again, I would iterate that that can be up to 1 million times faster than we can think about in the context of human real time. So with that view in mind, we've reached the conclusion that in this next era, intelligence about speed is going to become more valuable than speed itself. It used to be the case that just linear reduction in speed was an improvement, and that's no longer the case. Because we're actually sitting in a completely new universe of trading, electronic trading and trading venues, where it's no longer a single dimensional aspect or view of speed, because now we have a different range of venues and venue types, where we have fast and slow venues, and some of them are unintentionally slow, which was the kind of the old era. Most people were trying to improve the speed of their venues, not just to encourage, by the way, high-frequency trading, not at all. It's really that speed can help us be more predictable in outcome. And so the predictability of a trade and trade outcome becomes very important. But now, of course, we have a new type of venue, those that are intentionally slow. And so we have embraced mechanisms that intentionally slow down the execution of trades. So IEX, I think, created quite a rumble in the US with its introduction of a speed bump. And now we see NYSE following suit, and we see others introducing variations of that. We have the introduction of resting orders, which changes the dynamics of how one maybe times a trade. And of course, we have the introduction of random order delays. And so all of these have an intention, but they also have unintended consequences. And the fact is that the people who can best traverse this myriad landscape of basically intentionally fast venues, intentionally slow venues, unintentionally slow venues, across multiple asset classes, across a high volume of situations and events, the people who have the best insight, the best specific quantitative intelligence that can feed into their trade execution decision and provide the best transparency will have an advantage. And so in many respects, there's nothing new here, because it's always the case that people who have the best intelligence tend to profit the most. It's just that the landscape of what constitutes best intelligence is changing very, very quickly. And so we have come to the second conclusion, that in this new machine era, which is now upon us, that the new challenge is not speed, it's actual time. And that the people who can tell time the best, or more accurately, in the machine world will be able to derive intelligence and knowledge that gives them competitive advantage. Now that point may not be so obvious to you, but I'm going to attempt to make it really obvious. Let's say you were planning to attend an event, or you wanted to understand if you could maybe profit from a particular event. Maybe there's a sale on in your favorite diamond store, and you want to get the one big 100-carat gold ring that is on sale, just one of. The question I would ask to you, what piece of information do you think is the most valuable to you basically profiting from that event? Two pieces of information we have. The speed at which you can gain access to that event, or the time at which the event is actually occurring. Let's say you precisely knew the time, but you weren't the fastest, but you were the fastest and you didn't know the time of the event. It's the time of the event that's infinitely more valuable. And so the truth is that up until this point in time, we haven't been able to tell time in our financial markets, not accurately, not related to the event of interest. And so guess what we used as a proxy for that? Speed. Because once everyone had poor information on time, then it was he who was fastest, she who was fastest, got to the event best and had the greatest probability of winning. However, if we improve our knowledge of time, that changes the game completely. And so the unintended consequences of MiFID II and RTS 25 is it forces everyone to improve their intelligence and knowledge of time, and that will change everything. And so this idea is now gaining traction because people go, wow, I just hadn't thought of it that way, but that's correct. And so the fact is that the people who are profiting have already kind of got onto this idea. And because the venues previously never had any timestamp that you could do anything with, it was very hard. You could only do it localized. But again, with the advent of RTS 25 and now with the new ruling around CAT in the US, that's all changing. We have to synchronize time and we have to get a better accurate view of time. And so it opens up a whole new era for how we optimize trade execution. And so the agenda here, though, is much broader than simply trade execution because we heard all of the myriad of challenges that we have, of which machine time data is going to be the fuel that provides answers to these key questions. And we've seen the technology agenda shift, that people are wondering, how do I achieve superior execution? Really, they're saying, how do I achieve a competitive edge, something I can take to my clients or to my business? And so our ability to achieve both transparency and analytics of execution so that we can optimize that becomes paramount. Managing cost and risk. The very interesting thing about if time and speed go together, but time can maybe obviate the need to be the fastest, the interesting thing is, can machine time analytics allow us to use infrastructures like cloud, like open source, like big data stacks, so that we don't have to have the optimized speed technology? And the answer is yes, it can. And so again, machine time analytics becomes an enabler for using lower cost technologies. How do we lower regulatory tail risk? Right, the big issue per se is not the cost incurred in complying, although that's a big issue. It's the risk you incur as your business if you are found not in compliance, and what is the penalty? Very hard to judge. That's the real challenge on the business. And so how do we provide the best information that when someone comes calling, you're found to have done best practice, you have the best intelligence, you have the best information to be able to defend what you have done on your watch? That's the real issue. And then last but not least, and this is, I suspect next year, we will have cyber threat, cyber surveillance as a main headline item in this type of conference, because it's the next big thing that we have to address within financial markets. And so what is the prerequisite for machine time analytics within a trading infrastructure? Well, it starts with a basic concept, which is we have to be able to see and understand what is going on. And in electronic context, it starts with the ability for us to be able to continuously see, analyze, track, and forensically verify with the precise time and sequence of all machine actions and events that were involved in executing a trade. Which means that if someone comes back to you and says, for that trade, executed that way, why did that happen? Well, you have to be able to go in and say, for that specific trade, here's everything that happened, and it's absolutely ironclad. And so what are the prerequisites that you need for machine time data, machine time analytics. So in our opinion, there are four, I would say, prerequisites from a technology point of view. And the first one, pretty obvious, is you have to have the right data source, or maybe we call it the best data source. And by that we mean the granularity and the richness of the data. So does the data have the information, the raw information that you need, first? Is the data happening at the time scale that is relevant to the problem you're trying to address? And so the challenge we find is that very few data sources meet those requirements. So if you take log data, which is often a very popular source of data for us from the infrastructure, it's highly summarized data. It does not contain the information that we need. It's highly summarized, it misses a ton of stuff. And it also has the problem that it's what the machine thinks it did. It's not necessarily what actually happened. And so when we come to surveillance and compliance, we need to be very certain that we have a data source which says this actually happened and it's irrefutable. And so from our experience, it turns out that one of the best data sources that meet these requirements is directly from the network. It's the communications data. It's what the machines said to each other, because if it didn't happen on the network, it didn't happen. If it did happen on the network, it absolutely happened. And so it turns out that we use that. It's not exclusively that, because again, if it meets the basic criteria that it has the richness, it has the granularity, and has the timeliness, and it's forensically verifiable, then it's a good data source. We need to have accurate time. And can I emphasize the word accurate as opposed to precise? Precise time is easy. We can all do nanosecond timestamps and whatnot. Accurate time is really hard. And so I don't need to go into the difference, but it's basically the idea that it happened at the time that it was said. And so precision doesn't mean accuracy. And so a big part of the challenge in how we, let's say, MiFID II RTS25 specifies that we have to have business clocks synchronized to within 100 microseconds UTC. That's an accuracy requirement. And so how do you know? So when we gather all this data and we put it in the cloud and whatnot, how do you know? How do you know it's within 100 microseconds UTC across every single source that provided that data? That was my question to the regulators. But anyway, it's actually quite hard to forensically verify. And so the question becomes, are you going to throw people in jail because of that? I don't know. We have to figure it out. We have to work that one out. Machine learning is probably, deep learning, machine learning is probably one of the most disruptive technologies that's about to hit us. It's going to change everything. We've been investing in that for over 2 years. What we've learned is there's an awful lot of stuff that doesn't work. There's a lot of techniques and tech out there that when brought into financial markets is simply not fit for purpose. However, there's an awful lot of stuff out there that could be made work. And so that's something that we're doing a lot of work on. What we have found is that it's extremely effective on certain problems around prediction, around dramatically reducing the time to process this data. It's actually very, very good. Very, very good at doing that. And it's only going to get much more sophisticated. I'll say more about that later. The next piece is that if we look at the world of analytics and big data, a lot of that technology was kind of developed for batch-oriented operations, but we trade continuously. It's a data in motion. It's a real-time, continuous process. And so we need to be able to analyze things on the fly and be able to derive intelligence and results on the fly. And so that means a streaming analytic approach. And quite often we've found that there's a little bit of confusion on that, but we see that as a key prerequisite for those. While in no way do I want to maybe sell our approach and technology, I do think this is instructive in terms of how we've thought about this problem and how we've handled it. If we take a simple case of we have a machine, and it's trading, and we want to understand precisely what's going on. We want to use that as a basis, say, for meeting the various regulatory requirements of MiFID II, which, by the way, is not just order record keeping, it's not just transaction record, it's basically, have you applied best practice and principles and policies for how you monitor your trade infrastructure? Have you put in the proper cyber surveillance within that? And are you gathering high quality data? I listened to a talk from the FCA a number of months ago, and they were all about data quality. You know, basically don't provide misleading or poor data. And so data quality becomes massive. And what we have done is we've been looking at this problem for a long, long time. And you know, if I start bottom up, the first thing you have to do is you have to make sure that you're capturing the activity. And so the biggest challenge that we have seen out there is how do you capture the thing that you don't know about? That's the problem. Let's say there's a trading activity from some bot machine, you know, some automated engine that spins up, starts to trade, and you said that was shut down. None of your opt-in monitoring systems are capturing that, and yet it's trading out there. And so it's the things we don't expect that really mess us up. And so one of our approaches was that we have to have a method of discovering that potential activity and flagging it. And so again, we tap into the network, because if it's on the network, it's actionable, we would see it. And so that's another, so we auto-discover everything that's happening. And again, it's a completeness, it's a risk issue. We then need to be able to tackle this question of accuracy of time. And I'm sure we're going to hear more about that this afternoon. It's a tough problem, because like, who has the reference? How accurate is that? And then as you use technologies like PTP to distribute time, the challenge is how accurate is that? And does it fit within the regulation? This is a new class of problem. The industry hasn't done well on solving this yet, but one of the things that we do, and we've been doing this for quite a few years, is that analysis of time is kind of our bread and butter. And so we have a way of comparing, say, a reference clock against a distributed clock and understanding whether it's within reference or not. And then we can flag and provide diagnostics and whatnot. And that's just brand new. And then the other piece, this little silver box in the middle, it's a bit of a magic box in respect, because what we have found is that people don't slice the problem maybe in the most optimal way. What they might do is, I've got a real-time streaming big data problem. And so they apply maybe that if you take that on as a one chunk, you're going to go with extremely expensive tech to solve that one problem. But what if we could take away the time issue? What if, I keep on saying we have a data obesity problem. We're just taking in more and more data, but the key with eliminating obesity is to get the right nutrition. The fact is that only a fraction of the data that we actually need, and so we need to trim that down. And if we do that, then we can stream that into various big data technologies that allow us to pivot, play with the data, report against the data. And we're very bullish on, you know, the Apache suite of tools and whatnot, if it's deployed the right way. And so if you try to brute force it, it's simply not fit for purpose. And so there's always, we know that we can't get there unless we make the economics work. If the tech goes off like this and the profits are like this, it doesn't work. No one's going to do that. But people are figuring this out now. The challenge is that you know, just a quick rundown on challenges. How do we reliably distribute time? Are we going to have to re-architect all of our software systems? Is there an overhead incurred in putting this data monitoring in place? How reliable is the data system? How are we going to maintain this to spec? How do we actually prove compliance and causality? So the worst thing in the world is that when you have, you know, you think A cause B cause C, but it's actually A cause C to cause B. And you cannot get that wrong. The other piece that I want to highlight just in what we see as kind of state-of-the-art out here. So this is actually a fixed income system, an interdealer system based on the ION platform. And I'm showing fixed income because it's the newest thing out there. And I just wanted to highlight that it's entirely possible to take an order and to have basically machine time precision on every single action that occurs between the algo, the gateways, and the interdealer markets. And we now understand precisely every single thing that goes on, and it's time-stamped to its nanosecond precision, but we use a technology that gives us a couple of microseconds accuracy. And so that is there. I'm not saying it's straightforward to achieve, but it's there. And so all of that data is available and can be accessed. The other piece I'll highlight is that we would be big believers in cloud and cloud technology, mostly because the price and the agility of those systems is not a question of if, it's just a question of when. And the people who can figure out how to tap into that advantage will have an advantage. We worked with Abide, who are one of the kind of newer arms out there, and they run all of their systems within AWS. And what we do is we're able to take our clients' data and actually stream it into the ARM service in AWS. And that's a very efficient and cost-effective way of doing things. And we see, again, with FINRA in the US and their adoption of cloud, it's happening. It's definitely happening. Last topic I want to highlight here is cybersecurity. Many of our clients come to us and say, can you help us with cybersecurity, but make sure it has no impact on my trading performance? And that's always been the challenge, is that performance had tended to rule over security. And that's about to change. And so what we wanted to do was come up with a system that gave people a clear read on their level of risk with no impact on performance. And so it is the case that the same data that you tap into, the machine time data, becomes paramount for securing and detecting cyber attack. And one of the things that we do now is that we have a security module that when you're finished trading, so on non-trading hours, we run a complete analysis of every single machine action that happened on that day, and we look for attacks, threat indicators, unusual circumstances. We use machine learning to figure out are there deviations off mean, unusual trading connectivity actions, and then at the end of the trading day, we issue a report, and we identify all of the activity, and it has no impact on the actual trading performance. So my summary for you is that the disruptive technologies that we see, machine learning, big data, open source, public cloud, are all really important, mostly because it right-sizes the economic challenge. But the machine time approach will, I believe, fundamentally change how we think about trading. So much so that we believe that a new player is going to emerge. And we've all seen this one, but not maybe in this context. And this is the machine time trader. Basically, it's a machine that thinks at machine time, acts at machine time, basically can consume zettabytes of data, no problem, uses artificial intelligence to make trading decisions, and basically will far outperform what we do today. And that's not that far away. It's absolutely happening. And the fact is that all of these technologies will come as a result of our investments, primarily to meet regulatory requirements. But because we have to solve this problem, I believe that the ultimate will be that this new player will emerge. And so the summary around machine time analytics is that it's going to be imperative for us to be able to have intelligence around execution, not just transparency, but to understand the time at which I need to act. Right? If you understand precisely the time at which a price was issued, it's much more important than the speed at which you can act. infrastructure transparency, regulatory compliance, how to optimize trade performance, not infrastructure, but trade performance. And last but not least, when the high-frequency hacker comes knocking, you have to have the machine time data to be able to see that activity. That's it. Hopefully I didn't run too far over. I apologize if I did. I hope it has been an interesting, thought-provoking talk, and I'd welcome any questions if there are any. Okay. I think we're good. Thank you all. Thank you very much.